Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Torah studies class for the Torah portion of Lech. Now, my grandfather was a person who truly lived with the idea that you have to live with the times, meaning that you have to live with the Torah portion of the week. The Torah portion of the week literally energized him, excited him. It was his passion in life. It really was what fueled and motivated him to live with the Torah portion of the week. And I remember as a kid, right, he once relayed to me, and it's an idea that's also in the Hayom Yom, that the first two Torah portions of the year are sad, Bereshis and Noach. They're sad because Bereshis has the sin of the tree of knowledge. Noach is sad because it has the flood. But then comes the Torah portion of Lech Lecha, where we get to live with Avraham and Sarah the whole week. It's joyous, it's positive, it's happy. And he relayed this to me with such joy, it was contagious, right? With such energy, it was contagious, that this week we get to live with Avraham and Sarah the entire week. So the Torah portion begins where God instructs Avraham, right? Also Sarah, some extended family as well, that they are meant to leave the land that they were born. They have to leave their father's house, right? They have to leave everything that they know and travel to a foreign land. And in that land, they're going to turn into a great nation. God is going to bless them. And through them, the rest of the world is going to be blessed as well. But if you actually look at what takes place in the rest of this week's Parsha, and if you look at what takes place in the next many Torah portions, you're left with the question, what exactly is Avraham and Sarah and their children supposed to be doing? God tells them, go to the land of Israel. That's where you're going to be made great. That's where you are going to be blessed. And the rest of the world is going to be blessed because of you. But what exactly is God commanding them to do? Remember, at this point in history, the Torah was not given yet. So when God commands Avraham and Sarah to go to the land of Israel, they were not exactly arranging high holiday services. They weren't arranging sukkah parties. They weren't arranging big Pesach Seders. So what exactly were they doing that allowed for them to become a great nation and that they deserve to be blessed and the rest of the world blessed by them? The Torah tells us fascinating stories that take place in the life of Avram and Sarah, interesting ones in this week's Torah portion, ones that take place with Yitzchak, Rivka, right? Yaakov, Rachel, Leah, all kinds of great stuff. But at the end of the day, right, what exactly are we supposed to learn from those stories? Now we know that because of the fact that there were no mitzvahs that were commanded to them yet, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they each served God in their own style. The main thing that the Torah tells us about the way Abraham and Sarah served God is that they opened up their home. They served food and drink to guests that were passing by. Hospitality, that was the life of Abraham and Sarah. The Torah tells us about Yitzchak that he was very involved with digging wells. The Torah tells us about Yaakov that he was involved with cutting notches in various sticks and ultimately able to produce all kinds of sheep. Each one of the patriarchs and the matriarchs served God based on their own character, based on their own personality, in a very unique spiritual way. They made sure to develop their own unique, particular spiritual characteristic. This was the way that God was served before the Torah was given. Before the Torah was given, there were not 613 mitzvahs that were obligations that they needed to do. How did they serve Hashem? By developing their inner spirituality, by refining their character. Once the Torah was given, everything changed. Now the focus is action-oriented mitzvahs. That's what it's all about. When it comes to action-oriented mitzvahs, your personal spirituality, the level of refinement of your character, is not as much relevant. because it's the same tefillin that everyone is going to wear. It's the same Shabbos candles that everyone is going to light. It's the same matzah that's everyone going to eat. When it comes to performing mitzvahs, the main thing is the action that we do. And when it comes to the action that we do, in that, we're all the same. Now, this leads to the question that we want to address in tonight's class. Judaism post-Sinai is about practically fulfilling God's mitzvahs. It's about getting the job done. Should our personal character and spiritual refinement matter? When the bottom line is that we get the job done, what is the role of personal spiritual development play? Before the giving of the Torah, that's all that there was. That's all that the patriarchs did. After the giving of the Torah, what role does it play? Now, what do I mean by that? Imagine you have a politician. It doesn't matter if it's a mayor, governor, president. The politician is incredibly effective. Balances the budget, right? Make sure that all these services that their area needs is done. The economy is great, right? There's jobs are being created. Everyone is kept safe. Does it really matter, right, what the character is of this particular leader? As long as the person is getting the job done, right, the economy is flourishing, the government is flourishing, jobs are growing, and people are safe, and so on, does character really matter? Or is the main focus, get the job done, make sure we do the mitzvahs, and all is good, right? Does our character really matter? Every detail in the Torah is a lesson to us. Post-Sinai Jews on how to do, read that again. Every detail in the Torah is a lesson to us post-Sinai Jews on how to serve God. If this is the case, why does the Torah spill so much ink on the story of how our patriarchs worshiped God? If their method of worship was different from our contemporary method of worship, how can their story teach us how to serve God better? So this is a very important question. There are 10 Torah portions that detail the lives of our patriarchs and our matriarchs. They're fascinating stories. They're certainly inspirational, but they do not involve any of the 613 mitzvahs. Why does the Torah spend so much time on the stories of the patriarchs and matriarchs? The stories could be recorded in the Talmud, the stories can be recorded in the Medrash. Why does the Torah spend so much time on these stories when no mitzvahs are involved, right? The patriarchs' method of serving God is so different than ours. How can their stories teach us to serve God better? Right? If they did not have tefillin, if they did not have Yom Kippur, if they did not have a sukkah, they did not have a lulav and esrog, how can the story of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, right, matter to us in a practical and relevant way? So what can we learn from the story of the patriarchs? Now, of course, everyone realizes and recognizes that, yes, it's true that after the Torah was given to us, the main thing is that we get the job done, and that on a practical level, we observe the 613 mitzvahs. However, that's not the only job that we have. Why did God give us 613 mitzvahs? Not just so we could get the job done, the action-oriented mitzvahs done, but he wants us to make the world a godly place, a holy place, a refined place. The only way that we could make the world a godly place, a holy place, and a refined place is if we are a godly and a holy and refined people as well. Because as Jewish people, we are God's representatives here on earth. We are meant to be role models of righteousness. Right? This is the job of the Jewish people. We are meant to be role models of righteousness. Let's look what the next text says. At Sinai, God gifted us with his infinite transcendence. But first, our patriarchs had to pave the way by reaching the highest level of spiritual refinement that humans can reach. Only after they maximized their capacity did God gift their descendants with the Torah, the gift of infinite transcendence that exceeds human capacity. The same is true of our relationship with God. For the gift of God's transcendence to manifest in us through our Torah and mitzvahs, we must first refine our spirituality to our maximum capacity. Only then can we be transformed into instruments that channel and reveal the transcendence of God's Torah that was gifted to us at Mount Sinai. So the Rebbe explains here in this text, why is it that the Torah spends so much time telling us the story of the patriarchs and the matriarchs when they don't contain any of the actual mitzvahs that we need to do today? It's because the patriarchs and the matriarchs, they modeled for us what it means to actually be in a relationship with God. To be in a relationship with God means you have to refine yourself. You have to sensitize yourself. You have to grow as a person. You have to develop your character. You must become spiritually sensitive. You have to get out of your own box. The Torah spends so much time on telling us about the patriarchs and the matriarchs because these are the ultimate role models for how a person is meant to develop yourself spiritually and therefore be worthy of being God's partner and transforming the world and bringing God's holiness and spirituality to the world itself. So even though post-Sinai, the main thing is that we practically observe the Torah and the mitzvahs, the Torah spends so much time on the story of the patriarchs to tell us this incredible message, that we must make sure that we become refined as well. That it's not only that God reaches out to us with the Torah, but we must reach out to God as well. Now, one of the ways that this attitude is reflected, right, in the way that we're meant to develop our relationship with God, which is the attitude with which we're meant to have when it comes to studying Torah. Now, what is the terminology that we use for a Torah scholar in Hebrew? It's Talmud Chacham. Now, Talmud Chacham doesn't mean a person who is a master scholar. The phrase Talmud Chacham means a person who is a master student, right? This is the attitude that a person has to have when it comes to studying Torah. Never the master, always the student. There is an attitude of humility that is critical when it comes to approaching Torah study in order to allow for any type of spiritual growth and character refinement to take place at all. Because at the end of the day, we have to realize that we are subjective people, right? We are biased. We have egos, and we bring our own ego and we bring our own bias into our pursuit of the Torah, which is why humility must be first and foremost. Let's see what the Rebbe says in text number 3a here. Mental acuity doesn't suffice to drill down to the ultimate truth of a halacha. This is because the mind is not completely objective. It is subtly influenced by our mental temperament. For example, the house of Hillel often ruled leniently, and the house of Shammai was often stringent because Hillel was kind in soul and temperament, whereas Shammai was severe. Although the mind seeks the objective truth, thereby enabling us to understand alternate points of view, it is nevertheless constrained by temperament. This restricts our ability to absorb the ultimate truth of a matter when it differs from our view. It is only when we are completely self-effacing that we can transcend our dispositions and inclinations. This is the only way our mental capacity can arrive at the ultimate truth of a matter. So the Rebbe points out here that every one of us is subjective, right? We have a nature, we have a bias, we have a particular perspective, we have likes and dislikes, and we bring that into our study of the Torah, we bring that into our pursuit of Torah and mitzvahs and Judaism. Because who doesn't want the Torah to back and to support your beliefs, your feelings, your ideas? Because this is human nature, therefore the Torah says we have to step back a little bit, right? We have to humble ourselves, right? We have to act like the patriarchs, right? We have to humble ourselves to allow ourselves to see the objective truth of the Torah. The Rebbe continues with this idea, the next text. Therefore, when we discover that the Torah's halachic protocols dictate a ruling that is contrary to our opinion, we re-examine the matter with utter humility. And as much as we humbly accept the divine will, we immerse ourselves into the subject with stubborn determination until our opinion is authentically realigned with the halacha. This is such an important point that the Rebbe says, because how wonderful would it be if we could open up the Torah, we could attend a Torah class, and in that class and in the Torah tells us every thought, feeling, craving, idea, attraction that you have is wonderful, it's beautiful, it's kosher, it's godly, and it's spiritual. But of course, we know that's not the reality, right? We all have our own cravings, desires, attractions, and so on, which oftentimes are not perfectly in line with the Torah. And sometimes we learn a halacha, right? We learn a law, we learn a mitzvah, and perhaps it's not perfectly in line with the way that we're thinking, the way we grew up, the way that we were taught, perhaps the way that the culture in which we live wants us to think. Therefore, what do we have to do? We have to learn from Abraham. What does the Torah say to Abraham and to Sarah right at the beginning of this week's Torah portion? The Torah says, Abraham, you need to leave the land where you come from. You need to leave your father's house. You need to leave your birthright. The Torah says you have to put your bias aside. You have to leave your ego aside. You have to leave your subjective natural inclinations aside. God says to Abraham, leave that all aside. Go to the land of Israel. There, and in that place, and in that location, there you're going to become a great nation. That is where you're going to be blessed, and the rest of the world is going to be blessed in front of you. This is the incredible message that we have from this week's Torah portion, and why we have to learn all of these stories, because it tells us that we have to approach the Torah with humility, right? We have to approach the Torah in an objective manner, to the extent that we can actually align our values with the Torah values. The Torah's values actually become our values. Set your ego aside. Set your biases aside. Immerse yourself in the world of Torah. Become one with the Torah. Leave your land. Leave your birthplace. Leave your ego aside. And the Torah promises from there, that is where you're going to see the ultimate blessings in your life. And with that type of approach, right, Judaism is going to be the true passion, the fire, the energy of your life. And you'll be able to see the nachas in your family, the next generation, and many generations to follow. All right, this concludes our 30 minutes of Torah. Right, looks like actually we're a little early here. Next week, Tuesday, 7:30 to 8 p.m., we're going to explore the Torah portion of Vayera. And I also want to point out that we're about to start a 4-week JLI class. It's going to begin on 4 Wednesdays starting November 3rd. It's hard to outrun it. It's time to outsmart it. Outsmarting Anti-Semitism, a 4-part course on the absurdity of anti-Semitism and how to beat it with purpose, positivity, and pride. So look for more information coming up in the coming weeks. Right. If anyone has any questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions, I'd love to hear it.
What's the other Chabad U that I got an email for?
What's the other one?
Chabad U email, like online, on demand.
Chabad U email?
Yeah, from my number.
I'm not familiar with the Chabad U email, so I'm not sure. What was in the email?
I mean, about courses that it looks like it's like ongoing, not at any one time, like streaming it the way I read it.
Is it something that might be on Chabad.org?
It's just about you. Let me look it up.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly what that might be. All right, but anyone have any questions on anything that we learned tonight or on any other topic? I'm happy to stick around and to discuss.
How's your hand?
My hand is, It's doing all right. I got some oxy prescribed. I may take one of those tonight. We'll see.
Oh, so good drugs.
They certainly are.
What's this beer that?
Yes, Irv, you got a question?
I do. Are all of the mitzvahs in the Torah, in the 613?
All 613 mitzvahs can be found in the 5 books of Moshe. Now, there are rules for how you can figure out what is a mitzvah and what's not a mitzvah. Because if you actually go from beginning to end and you count up all the do's and the don'ts, you will get more than 613.
Oh,
But
really?
some mitzvahs are absorbed into other mitzvahs and so on, but all 613 are in the 5 books of Moses.
So when we think that we are doing a mitzvah without having looked in the Torah to see a specific, are we following the Torah or are we just making something up and thinking that it's a mitzvah?
Oh, that would all depend on what you're doing.
Let's say it's a positive,
Now,
obviously.
Oftentimes
Oh, it's
people
the same
translate
brother.
the word mitzvah as some type of good deed or a positive deed. While most of the time that's true, that's not actually an accurate translation of the word mitzvah, right? A mitzvah means something that was commanded by God. So odds are, if you're doing something positive and good, there's a good chance that it's a mitzvah because God likes to command positive and good things. So odds are it is going to be a mitzvah, but I would need a specific example on that particular activity to know whether it's a mitzvah or not. Sometimes you could just be being a good guy.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? All right, if we have no more questions, thank you so much for joining us this week. And I got you out of here in less than 30 minutes. There may be an occasion where we go over, so we're going to put this time in the bank and we'll be able to use it in future weeks. Have a fabulous week. I look forward to seeing you next week. Be well, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
well.
Rabbi.
Very welcome.